Hello, dear listeners. I'm happy to welcome you to my channel. I present to you my new original story. Enjoy the listen. Zora Imani sat in the kitchen with a cup of cold tea, looking out the window at the September twilight. The clock ticked on the wall, dinner was finishing up on the stove, and one thought circled endlessly in her head. Just 3 years ago, she never could have imagined her life would turn into this kind of existence. Working at the community college, a paycheck that vanished into thin air, a husband who had completely lost interest in their family, and a mother-in-law who treated her like nothing more than a free attachment to her son. Kofi Kemet stumbled into the apartment around 7, tossed his windbreaker onto a chair in the entryway, and headed to the kitchen, glued to his phone. He didn't even say hello. He just plopped down in his usual spot, still scrolling across the screen. Zora ladled soup into 2 bowls, placed one in front of him, and sat down opposite. The silence was familiar, thick, and uncomfortable. "Mom called," Kofi finally mumbled, not looking up from the screen. "She found a killer spot for a vacation, a lodge down in the Outer Banks. 3 weeks, fresh air, fishing, the whole deal." Zora slowly lowered her spoon. The Outer Banks. 3 weeks. A clear sequence instantly formed in her mind. Mother-in-law, vacation, money. It was always the same drill. "We weren't planning on going anywhere, though," she said carefully. "I wanted to spend my break at home. I really need a new laptop. The old one is practically dead. I've been saving for it all year." Kofi finally tore his eyes from the phone and looked at her with slight bewilderment, as if she'd said something utterly ridiculous. "The laptop can wait. Mom already looked everything up and checked the prices. It's a sweet place. Everyone raves about it. You love nature, don't you?" Zora inwardly scoffed. Loves nature. She loved silence, books, and the chance to not cook for anyone for a full week. But that, of course, mattered to absolutely no one. "And how much is this lodge going to cost?" she asked, even though she already knew the answer. "Well, it's for 3 people. Kofi stared back at his phone, pretending to look up figures, though he certainly knew them by heart. "Mom said it'd come out to about $2,500, maybe a little less." $2,500, exactly what she had saved in her account. For a year, she had put money aside from every paycheck, denying herself new clothes, skipping lunch with colleagues, saving every dime. And now that money was supposed to dissolve into a 3-week trip with her husband and her mother-in-law. "Cough, those are all my savings," Zora said quietly. "I've been saving for a laptop for a year. It's impossible to work without it. I'm constantly having to sit in the community college library or beg colleagues to borrow theirs." Kofi shrugged, sent some text message, and reached for the bread. "Mom said we'd pay you back later. I'm supposed to get a bonus. You know." She knew. There hadn't been a bonus in 18 months, just as there had been no attempt from him to change anything in his life. Kofi worked as a supervisor for a construction contractor, earned an average salary, and spent it on God knows what. He brought home maybe a third of it, claiming the rest went to gas, lunches, and small expenses. Zora had long ago stopped asking for details. It was always pointless. His phone on the table vibrated. Kofi glanced at the screen and grinned. "It's Mom. I'll put her on speaker. She wants to talk to you." He didn't even ask if Zora wanted to talk. He just pressed the button. A sweet, syrupy voice belonging to Amara Lumumba, the voice that always made Zora cringe, leapt from the speaker. "Kofi, did you tell her about the Outer Banks? Zora, honey, can you hear me?" "Hello, Amara Lumumba," Zora replied politely, continuing to slowly eat her soup. "That's wonderful! Listen, sweetie, I've calculated everything. I found a simply marvelous place. 3 weeks at the resort, cabins with amenities, a lake nearby. Kofi can fish. I can finally read my books. And you? Well, you're our domestic goddess, aren't you? You can cook us some tasty meals and do the laundry. You know how important domestic comfort is when you're on vacation." Zora almost choked on her soup. So she was expected to pay for the trip and then spend 3 weeks catering to 2 grown adults who were supposed to be relaxing. She slowly wiped her mouth with a napkin, trying to keep her face calm. Amara Lumumba, I work. I need my vacation to rest, not to— Oh, Zora, don't be silly, her mother-in-law interrupted, and the sweet tone gave way to a subtle edge of steel. You're young and healthy. Kofi and I need a real vacation away from the city hustle. We're so tired. But you'll spend your time productively in the fresh air. Cooking outside is completely different, you'll see. Kofi nodded, looking at his phone, as if his mother were speaking the most sensible words in the world. Zora looked at him, then at the phone speaker from which that voice continued to pour. And here's what I thought, Zora, dear. Since you're working and your salary is steady, why don't you pay for the tickets for all three of us? Kofi and I will certainly pay you back somehow later. You wouldn't refuse us, would you? We're family, after all. Family. An interesting word, family. The word for a place where she paid most of the bills, cooked, did laundry, and cleaned, and her husband and mother-in-law magnanimously allowed her to do so. A family where her opinion counted for nothing. A family where $2,500 of her hard-earned savings were supposed to fund their vacation, and she would get 3 weeks of work as a cook and laundress. Amara Lumumba, those are all my savings, Zora repeated, trying to keep her voice even. I saved them for a laptop. Oh, Zora, honestly, a laptop is nothing. It's just a gadget. But family is sacred. We're not strangers, are we? And besides, is it really that much money? $2,500 for 3 people is practically pennies for a trip like that, you understand, right? No, she didn't understand. She didn't understand how it could be practically pennies. She didn't understand why her dreams were always nothing and just a gadget. She didn't understand why she had to give up her last savings for people who couldn't even manage a proper thank you. But arguing was pointless. If she refused, Amara Lumumba would throw a fit, accuse her of being greedy, selfish, and of not loving her husband. Kofi would side with his mother, as always. Then there would be days of silence, heavy reproaches, a miserable atmosphere, and in the end, she would still have to pay. Only she would feel guilty, too. Fine, Zora said curtly. I'll pay for it. Oh, you're a doll. A perfect angel. Amara Lumumba almost sang the words. I knew you wouldn't let us down. Transfer the money tomorrow. I'll text you the details. And don't worry, we'll absolutely pay you back as soon as Kofi gets his bonus. Kofi gave an approving nod, as if some important national issue had been resolved, and immediately returned to his phone. His mother babbled on for a couple more minutes about the charms of the Outer Banks, about how marvelous a time they'd have, then finally said goodbye and hung up. Zora sat in silence, staring at the half-eaten bowl of soup. Inside, everything had tightened into a hard knot, not out of anger, but out of the chilling realization that she had agreed again, conceded again, and allowed them to dictate her life again. Well, that's settled, Kofi announced with satisfaction, setting his phone down. Mom was getting worried you'd dig your heels in. Kof, do you honestly think you'll pay me back? Zora asked quietly, though she knew the answer. He shrugged, finishing his soup. Well, I'll try. They promised the bonus around Christmas. If they give it, of course. If they give it, just like last year and the year before that. Zora stood up, clearing the dishes into the sink. Her hands moved mechanically, but in her head, the numbers spun. 2,500. A year of saving, a year of hoping she could finally upgrade her equipment, work comfortably from home, and not have to trek to the college or to a colleague's place every evening. She couldn't fall asleep for a long time that night. She lay, staring at the ceiling, listening to Kofi snore beside her. Once she had loved this man. Once she believed they would build a life together, support each other, raise children. But over 5 years of marriage, everything had slowly slid into this swamp. Amara Lumumba had set a course from the start to keep her son tethered to her, and Kofi, instead of standing up for his own family, simply drifted along, choosing the path of least resistance. Zora turned onto her side and closed her eyes. She had to sleep. Tomorrow was work again. Classes, students, grading papers, and another trip to the bank to withdraw her last savings for someone else's vacation. She got up earlier than her husband, got ready, and left the house. The bank branch was nearly empty. Only one older woman was arguing with a consultant. Zora went to the ATM, entered her card code, and requested a withdrawal of $2,500. The amount flashed on the screen, blinked, and required confirmation. She pressed the button. The crisp new bills slid out of the slot. Zora took them, shoved them into her purse, and walked out onto the street. The sun was shining brightly. People hurried along the sidewalk, and children laughed somewhere nearby. An ordinary morning, yet in her purse lay a year of her life, turned into paper she was about to give away for the privilege of doing someone else's laundry for 3 weeks. At the college, Zora barely made it through her first class. Students asked questions about their term papers, and she answered on autopilot, all the while thinking about how she would hand over the money that evening, and how Amara Lumumba would accept it with the air of a great benefactor, perhaps even saying a perfunctory thanks in passing, as if it weren't $2,500, but just some loose change for groceries. At lunchtime, she transferred the money to her mother-in-law's bank account, just as she had requested. Amara Lumumba immediately sent a message. "Got it, smart girl. Booking the reservations now. You won't regret it, Zora. You'll see." Zora looked at her phone screen, then opened her bank app. Balance, $5.20. Payday wasn't for another 2 weeks. $5.20 until the end of the month. Thank goodness there were still groceries at home. That evening, when she returned home, Kofi greeted her with a pleased look. "Mom got everything settled," he announced without even a hello. 3 weeks, starting June 15th, right when your break starts. "Uh-huh," Zora nodded mechanically, kicking off her shoes. "That's great. It's going to be awesome. I can already picture myself fishing early in the morning, then making some good chowder." "I will make the chowder," she corrected him, walking into the kitchen. Kofi laughed, as if she'd made a joke. "Oh yeah, of course. You're the master chef. Mom said there's a communal kitchen at the lodge, but we can cook in the cabin too. We should take our own cookware, just in case." Zora silently nodded, pulling the leftovers of yesterday's dinner from the fridge. A mental list was already forming: pots, pans, plates, silverware, bed linens, towels, laundry detergent, lots of it, because 3 weeks without a washing machine. All of it would need to be packed, hauled to the train station, and then unloaded. And groceries, too. Amara Lumumba certainly wouldn't want to spend her own money on food. That meant Zora would get her next paycheck and immediately have to buy groceries for 3 people for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of cooking, washing, and cleaning while her husband fished and her mother-in-law read romance novels on a deck chair. On her money, during the vacation, Zora had planned to spend at home in silence with books and the TV series she hadn't been able to finish for 6 months. Zora put her plate in the microwave, set the timer, and stood watching the dish rotate. Suddenly, she realized she was no longer angry. She wasn't even upset. She just felt hollow inside, as if something had completely burned out. She took out the reheated dinner and sat down at the table. Kofi had already gone into the living room and turned on the TV. Zora ate slowly, mechanically chewing her food. Then she washed the dish, wiped her hands, and picked up her phone. She opened the banking app and looked at the $5 balance. Then she opened the transaction history. There it was, the transfer to Amara Lumumba's card, $2,500. One single figure had wiped out a year of her life. Zora leaned back in her chair, placed the phone on the table, and looked out the window at the evening city. Suddenly, a thought came to her with astonishing clarity. What if I just didn't go? She didn't even speak the thought aloud, but it lingered, clinging to something deep inside her. Zora stood up and walked into the living room. Kofi was lying on the couch, engrossed in his phone. A talk show was blaring on the TV screen. She lay down next to him and closed her eyes. The next day, she came home from work and found a message in her app from Amara Lumumba. It was a long, frantic text with a dozen exclamation points. Her mother-in-law was sharing her joy. "The reservations are confirmed. Everything's set. What happiness!" She couldn't wait for the trip. Below it was a list. Zora scrolled through 3 pages of fine print. What to bring: groceries, cereal, pasta, canned goods, vegetables, fruit, frozen meat, chicken, deli slices, cheese, milk. Next, cookware, 3-quart and 5-quart pots, 2 frying pans, a ladle, a kettle. Cleaning supplies, laundry detergent, dish soap, rags, sponges, bedding, and towels. Zora read to the end and smiled thinly. Amara Lumumba was planning a 3-week self-catered expedition. And of course, the daughter-in-law was expected to supply everything on her own dime, on her own back. At the very bottom was a postscript. Zora, sweetie, I know this is a lot, but everything at the resort is overpriced. It's easier to take our own. You're young and strong, you can handle it. Kofi and I aren't as capable of carrying heavy things anymore. Zora put down the phone, walked to the kitchen, opened the cabinet, and pulled out the pots. The big 3-quart one, old but sturdy, and the 5-quart aluminum one she'd once used to make chili for a friend's wedding. 2 frying pans, one heavy cast iron, the other smaller. She placed everything on the table, then went to the laundry closet. She took out 3 boxes of good, expensive laundry detergent she'd bought on sale, stocking up for months. Let her go to the Outer Banks. Let Amara Lumumba wash her blouses and Kofi wash his socks. The following days were spent in a strange flurry. Amara Lumumba called every evening, clarifying if Zora had prepared everything. Had she forgotten anything? Kofi occasionally put in his 2 cents. Hey, grab this too. Don't forget that. Zora nodded, agreed, and wrote things down. With each passing day, something cold and hard grew inside her. She wasn't angry or boiling. She simply observed it all from a distance, as if watching a movie about someone else's life. A week before the trip, Amara Lumumba came to visit, sat in the kitchen, asked for tea, and looked around with a critical eye. Well, Zora, ready for the trip? She asked, sipping from her cup. Yes, Zora replied briefly, stirring sugar into her own tea. You've gathered the pots and pans? Figured out how many groceries you need? Gathered and figured. Amara Lumumba nodded approvingly. Good girl. I always told Kofi you were domestic. At least you're useful for something. Zora slowly lifted her eyes to her mother-in-law. She was sitting there, looking pleased with herself, sipping her tea, not even noticing what she had just said. At least you're useful for something, meaning in everything else, she was useless. Amara Lumumba, are you ready for the trip? Zora asked calmly. Her mother-in-law waved her hand dismissively. What about me? I don't need much. A couple of dresses, my favorite books. I'm going to rest, not work. You, on the other hand, yes. You'll have to put in some effort, but it's easier in the fresh air. And besides, we're family. We have to take care of each other, right? Right, Zora echoed. Amara Lumumba finished her tea, stood up, and looked around the kitchen one last time. Well, I'm off. I have tons to do before we leave. Don't forget to buy the tickets for everyone. The train is better than driving. It's cheaper and more comfortable. I'll buy the tickets, Zora nodded. After her mother-in-law left, Zora sat in the kitchen for a long time, staring into her cup. Then she picked up her phone, checked the train schedule, found the right route to Raleigh, selected the date, 3 tickets, a sleeper cabin, lower and upper berths. She completed the order and paid with her card, which had only received her latest paycheck yesterday, another $200 gone. Her remaining balance was dwindling fast, but it didn't matter anymore. The tickets arrived in her email. Zora downloaded them, printed them at work, brought them home, and showed them to Kofi. He nodded approvingly without even looking at the details. Perfect. Mom will be happy. Amara Lumumba was indeed happy. She called that evening and praised her. Good job, Zora. At least you're useful for something. The second time that day. Zora hung up the phone, lay on the bed, and closed her eyes. Nothing stirred inside her anymore, just a cold, clear resolve. She knew exactly what she was going to do, down to the last detail. The next few days, Amara Lumumba barraged her with messages. In the morning, an updated grocery list. At noon, a reminder of which cookware not to forget. In the evening, new instructions. Zora opened the messages, read them, and silently nodded to herself. Kofi dutifully forwarded everything his mother wrote without bothering to add a single word of his own. In one message, her mother-in-law meticulously detailed the daily schedule at the resort. Zora read it and smirked. Amara Lumumba planned to get up at 9, eat breakfast on the veranda, then read until lunch. After lunch, a nap, then back to the veranda, a book, tea and cookies, and in the evening, dinner, a walk, and bed. The perfect vacation for a person who did absolutely nothing. Kofi had also mapped out his schedule. Up at 6, fishing until noon, lunch, a nap, then more fishing until evening, dinner, TV, and bed. Nobody asked about Zora's schedule, but she knew perfectly well what it would be. Up at 6 to make breakfast for her husband before fishing. Breakfast for her mother-in-law by 9, cleaning, laundry, preparing lunch. After lunch, washing dishes, prep for dinner, more laundry. In the evening, dinner for everyone, more dishes, more cleaning. 21 days straight. "What are you thinking about?" Kofi asked, passing by the kitchen where Zora was sitting with her phone. "Oh, nothing. Just looking at the list. Your mother sent another one." "Ah, well, look it over. Mom's experienced. She knows what we need." Zora looked up at her husband. He was standing in the doorway, content, relaxed, already mentally on the lake, with his rod and thermos. There was no doubt in his mind that everything was right, that his wife should spend all her savings, haul half the contents of their apartment, and spend 3 weeks catering to 2 grown adults. "Kof, aren't you bringing anything yourself?" she asked calmly. "What do you mean? I'm taking my rods, my tackle, my clothes. What else do I need? And are you going to help me with my bags?" Kofi shrugged. "I'll carry mine. You asked me to bring the pots and pans. That's your department. I don't know anything about that." Zora nodded. Of course, he doesn't know anything about that, but he knew perfectly well how to shift all responsibility onto his wife and live for his own pleasure. That evening, Amara Lumumba called. This conversation lasted nearly an hour. The mother-in-law spoke passionately about how they would relax, how beautiful the nature was, how fresh the air was. Then she smoothly transitioned to practical matters. "Zora, darling, I thought about it. The resort has a communal kitchen, of course, but it's much nicer to cook in the cabin, more intimate, you know? So take everything you need, big pots so there's enough for everyone, good frying pans so the fish fries properly. And Zora, don't forget to grab some fresh vegetables. I love salads, you know." "Amara Lumumba, vegetables will spoil on the train," Zora noted cautiously. "Well, then buy them there. What's the big deal? You'll have your paycheck by then." Her paycheck, half of which had already gone to train tickets, and the other half was expected to cover groceries for 3 people for 3 weeks. Zora took a deep breath, counting to 10. "Fine, I'll buy them there." "That's my girl! And Zora, I also wanted to talk about the daily schedule. It's important for me to get my rest, so I'd like breakfast by 9. No earlier, or I'll wake up tired. Lunch around 2, after my walk, and dinner by 7 in the evening. No later. You'll manage all that, right?" "I'll manage," Zora answered, mechanically, writing the times down on a notepad. "And also, darling, I'd like you to do a little laundry every day, instead of letting the dirty clothes pile up. I don't like it when things sit unwashed. It's unhygienic." "Every day," Zora repeated, adding another item to the list. "Wonderful. I'm so happy we're all going to spend time together. It will strengthen our family. Truly, it will. And you, Zora, will finally understand how important it is to care for your loved ones. It's a woman's calling, by the way." Amara Lumumba spoke for another 20 minutes, and Zora listened silently, drawing patterns on the sheet of paper. When her mother-in-law finally said goodbye and hung up, Zora looked at the scribbled sheet. A detailed, minute-by-minute schedule. Her vacation transformed into a cook's and washerwoman's shift. She neatly folded the sheet, put it in a desk drawer, then took out her phone, opened the banking app, and studied it for a long time, delving into every function. Then she went into the settings, poked around, found what she was looking for, and nodded to herself. The next day, Zora visited a home goods store, walking down the aisles, selecting 3 large 6-pound boxes of laundry detergent, 2 bottles of dish soap, sponges, rags, rubber gloves. She put everything in the cart and paid at the checkout. Another $50 gone. At home, she spread her purchases out in the kitchen. Kofi peered in and whistled. "Whoa, what's all this? Starting a laundromat?" "Your mother asked me to bring it," Zora replied calmly, stacking the boxes into a large duffel bag. Mom knows best. She's the expert in these matters. An expert in getting others to work for her, Zora thought, but said nothing, just nodded and continued packing. By the end of the week, a whole mountain of bags and boxes had accumulated in Zora's entryway. Pots, pans, dishes, bed linens, towels, cleaning supplies. Amara Lumumba came by to inspect the preparations and was satisfied. "Good job, Zora. Everything's right. Just don't forget an extra blanket. They said it gets cold at night. And bring your own pillows. I don't like strange blankets and pillows," she repeated. Zora mentally calculated how many more bags she'd have to haul. "And don't worry, dear. Kofi will help you carry everything. Right, son?" Kofi, sitting on the couch with his phone, nodded distractedly. "Yeah, I'll help." Amara Lumumba stayed for another hour, sipping tea and sharing her plans. She had already bought 3 new novels specifically for the trip and ordered a new bathing suit, just in case she felt like swimming in the lake. She talked about how much she missed real nature, the silence, the fresh air. "And Zora, when was the last time you were out in nature?" she asked, biting into a cookie. 3 years ago, maybe." "See? That's because you're always working. You need to know how to relax, dear. I, for example, always find time for myself. It's important for your health." Zora looked at her mother-in-law. She sat there, pleased with herself, in a new blouse with a neat manicure and a fresh blowout. A woman who had spent her whole life finding time for herself at someone else's expense. When Amara Lumumba left, Kofi asked, "So, ready to leave?" "Almost," Zora replied. "Great. I bought new tackle, by the way. A guy at work recommended it. Says there are some good bass there." "Cough, where did you get the money for the tackle?" "Oh, I took a little from my stash. Why, couldn't I?" His stash. He always had money for his own needs. Tackle, hanging out with friends, all sorts of useless junk. But for the family, for his wife, for shared expenses, his wallet was always empty. "You could," Zora said softly. Kofi sighed in relief, returned to his phone. A minute later, he was laughing at some video, showing the screen to his wife. "Look, that's hilarious!" Zora looked, nodded, smiled faintly, then got up and went to the kitchen. She took out her phone, opened her notes, wrote down a few points, reread them, and nodded to herself. Everything was right. Everything was planned. 3 days before the departure, Amara Lumumba sent another message with recipes she wanted to try on vacation. Zora opened the file and quickly scanned it. 12 complicated recipes, requiring time and a lot of ingredients. Baked fish in cream sauce, stew in ceramic pots, chicken divan, pies with various fillings. Amara Lumumba, "Am I going to be the one cooking all this?" Zora typed. "Of course, sweetie. Who else?" came the reply, with 3 smiling emojis. Zora put down the phone and walked to the window. Rain was falling outside. People hurried along the sidewalk with umbrellas. The city lived its own life, and she stood watching it all, feeling a strange calmness inside, like before an important exam when you've studied everything and are just waiting for the time to begin. The day before they left, Zora got up early. Kofi was still sleeping, snoring into his pillow. She walked to the kitchen, brewed coffee, sat at the table with her phone, opened the banking app, and checked all the settings again. Everything was in place. Everything was ready. Then she methodically began to pack. She stuffed the large duffel bag to the brim: pots, pans, dishes, silverware, cutting boards, ladles, spatulas, can openers, corkscrews, everything that could be useful in the kitchen. On top, she packed the cleaning supplies: 3 boxes of detergent, dish soap, sponges, rags, gloves, then the bed linens, towels, 2 pillows, and a light blanket. The duffel bag was enormous, packed solid. She barely managed to zip it up. Separately, she packed a small bag for herself, putting in 1 change of clothes, her makeup bag, and her phone charger, nothing more. Kofi woke up around 9, walked into the kitchen, yawning. "Wow, you're all packed up already?" "Yes," Zora replied curtly, zipping up her small bag. "Where's my stuff?" "Yours is over there, on the couch. I folded it last night." Kofi walked into the living room and came back with a displeased look. "You didn't pack my blue shirt. I wanted to take that one." "It was in the wash. It didn't dry in time." "Well, you could have ironed it dry." Zora looked at her husband in silence. He stood there, looking offended, like a child whose toy had been taken away. 32 years old, and he couldn't pack for himself. "Take another shirt," she said calmly. "I don't have any other normal ones." "Then take an abnormal one." Kofi was about to retort, but his phone rang. His mother. He answered, and his face instantly smoothed out. "Hey, Mom." "Yeah, we're up. We're about to leave. Okay, see you at the station." He hung up and looked at the clock. "We have to leave in an hour. Hurry up." Zora nodded, went to the bathroom, washed her face, got ready, put on comfortable jeans, a simple gray t-shirt, and sneakers, and looked at herself in the mirror. An ordinary, calm face. Nothing special. A woman going on vacation with her family. In the entryway, Kofi was struggling with his own bags, trying to cram his fishing rods into the case. "Zora, help me." Zora helped him zip up the case. Kofi breathed a sigh of relief. "Okay, are we ready?" "Ready." They called a cab and started bringing the bags downstairs. Kofi carried his 2 bags and the rod case. Zora hauled the enormous duffel bag on wheels and her small shoulder bag. The driver helped load everything into the trunk and shook his head, looking at the quantity of luggage. "Going for a month?" "3 weeks," Kofi replied. "Mm-hmm," the driver drawled, and started the car. At the station, Amara Lumumba was already waiting for them. She stood in the shadow of the awning, elegant in a light pantsuit, with a small, rolling carry-on and a compact travel bag beside her. Everything was neat, light, and convenient. A woman going to relax, not to work. "There you are," she exclaimed, kissing her son's cheek. "I was getting worried." "Hello, Amara Lumumba." Her mother-in-law glanced at their luggage and nodded with satisfaction. "Good girl, I see you brought everything. That's right. Everything at the resort is triple the price." Kofi began unloading the bags from the cab. The driver helped, placing everything on the sidewalk, took his fare, and drove off. Amara Lumumba majestically moved toward the station entrance. "Kofi, take my carry-on, please. I'm tired." Kofi dutifully grabbed his mother's small suitcase along with his own bags. Zora was left with the duffel bag, which she rolled behind her. It was heavy, bulky, and constantly tried to veer off course. The station inside was crowded. Amara Lumumba immediately found a cafe and settled at a table. "Kofi, get me a coffee, please, an Americano with milk on the side." Kofi nodded and looked at his wife. "Zora, sit with the bags." Zora sat on a bench next to the luggage. Amara Lumumba settled into the cafe, took out her phone, and stared at the screen. Kofi stood in line for coffee. The station buzzed with voices, announcements, and footsteps. Zora watched it all from the side. Her mother-in-law relaxing in the cafe, her husband obediently waiting in line, and the huge duffel bag packed with the necessities for their comfort. And inside her, nothing stirred, just the cold, clear certainty that in an hour, everything would change. Kofi brought his mother her coffee and bought himself a cup of tea. He didn't offer Zora anything. She didn't ask, simply sat there looking at the departure board. "Zora, let's go to the platform. We're boarding soon," Kofi called out about 20 minutes later. They moved toward the platform exit. Amara Lumumba walked ahead, unhurriedly, gracefully. Kofi hauled his and his mother's bags. Zora rolled the duffel bag, heavy, clumsy, its wheels catching on the uneven floor. On the platform, Amara Lumumba found a shaded spot, sat on a bench, took a small fan out of her bag, and fanned herself. "It's so stuffy," she complained. "Kofi, get me some water." "Mom, the train is in 15 minutes. I'll miss it." "Well, run quickly. I feel terrible without water." Kofi sighed and looked at his wife. "Sit here. I'll be fast." He rushed back into the station building. Amara Lumumba fanned herself, looking down the tracks. Zora stood nearby, her hand resting on the handle of the duffel bag. "Well, Zora, soon we'll be off," her mother-in-law said dreamily. "I'm so looking forward to this trip, you know. 3 weeks away from the city. Peace, nature, fresh air. I'll finally get a real rest." "Are you tired?" Zora asked. "Terribly, dear. The last few months have been a nightmare. Always running errands, always something to do. I haven't had a proper rest in ages." Zora nodded. Amara Lumumba hadn't worked in 5 years, living off her pension and her son's money. Her errands were simple: a weekly manicure, coffee with friends, TV shows in the evening. But she was exhausted, of course, utterly exhausted. Kofi returned with a bottle of water and handed it to his mother. She nodded her thanks and took a sip. "Thank you, son. You're so thoughtful." The train appeared in the distance, slowly approaching. Amara Lumumba got up and brushed off her pantsuit. "Ready? Let's go." They moved toward the car, Amara Lumumba in front, light, bag-free, Kofi behind her, with his mother's carry-on and his own bags. Zora brought up the rear with the duffel bag. The attendant checked their tickets at the car door and nodded them through. Amara Lumumba was the first to step into the vestibule and walk into their compartment. Kofi started hauling the bags. "Zora, come on. Let me get that duffel bag," he said. "Wait just a second," Zora replied. "I forgot something at the kiosk. You go ahead and load up. I'll be quick." Kofi frowned. "What did you forget?" "Oh, nothing much. I wanted to buy some wet wipes. 2 minutes." "Well, hurry up. The train's leaving soon." Zora nodded, stepped away from the car. Kofi hauled the duffel bag into the vestibule, then his own bags, and disappeared inside the car. Zora stood on the platform, looking at the train, then slowly turned around and walked toward the exit. Unhurriedly, calmly, like a person just going to buy wipes. She walked past the kiosk without even slowing down, went into the station building, crossed the hall, and walked out to the main plaza. She stopped and looked around. The platform wasn't visible from here, only the roof of the station and a slice of gray sky. Zora took out her phone, checked the time, 4 minutes until departure. She crossed the street and spotted the cafe she'd planned to visit. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. It was cool in the cafe, and quiet music was playing. Zora went to the counter and ordered a cappuccino. The waitress took the order and smiled. Zora walked to a window table, sat down, placed her phone on the table, and turned it off. The screen went dark. Through the window, she could see the station. Somewhere in there, on the platform, the train was waiting. Somewhere in their compartment, Kofi and Amara Lumumba were settling into their seats, unpacking their things, pulling pots and detergent from the duffel bag, and probably starting to wonder what was keeping Zora. The waitress brought the cappuccino and set it on the table. Zora thanked her, cupped the mug with her hands. The warmth spread through her fingers. She looked out the window and smiled slowly. For the first time in many months, it was a genuine smile. Kofi hauled the last bag into the compartment and breathed a sigh of relief. Amara Lumumba was already settled in the lower berth, examining her reflection in the compartment mirror. She adjusted her hair, took lipstick from her makeup bag, applied it, and satisfied, put the bag away. "Well, now we can relax," she said, looking around the compartment. "It's not a bad spot, clean. Kofi, put my carry-on up top, please." Kofi dutifully hoisted his mother's suitcase onto the top shelf, then began to arrange his own things. Zora's duffel bag stood in the middle of the aisle, huge and blocking the way. He nudged it toward the wall with his foot. "Zora, where are you?" he shouted toward the vestibule. There was no answer. Kofi walked into the corridor and looked out the window. The entire platform was visible from end to end. People were clearing out. The folks seeing off their loved ones were leaving. Zora was nowhere to be seen. "Zora!" he called out louder, looking around. Silence, only the hum of the station, the voices of other passengers, and the banging of car doors. Kofi took out his phone, found his wife's number, and pressed dial. Long rings. 1, 2, 3. Then the automated voice message. "The subscriber you are trying to reach is temporarily unavailable or outside the coverage area." "That's weird," Kofi muttered, frowning. Amara Lumumba poked her head out of the compartment. "Kofi, where is Zora? The train is about to leave." "She said she went to the kiosk for wet wipes." "For wet wipes?" Amara Lumumba raised an eyebrow meaningfully. "Right now with only a few minutes until departure?" "She said it would be quick." Kofi dialed his wife's number again. More rings, then the same message. He walked into the vestibule and stepped onto the platform, looking around. A woman with a child was rushing along the platform. A late passenger. An attendant was helping an elderly couple with a suitcase. But Zora was not there. "Damn it!" Kofi cursed under his breath, taking out his phone. A third call. A fourth. A fifth. Still the same message. Kofi felt irritation start to boil inside him. Where had she gone? Wet wipes, for God's sake, a 2-minute errand, and the train was about to pull out. He walked along the car, peering into the next one. Maybe she got confused? No, Zora wouldn't get confused. She bought the tickets herself. Kofi returned to his car and dialed the number again. Still unavailable. The attendant stuck her head out of the vestibule. "Young man, get inside. We're leaving now." "1 minute. I'm waiting for my wife. She went to the kiosk." "Well, hurry her up, or you'll both be left behind." Kofi nodded, staring at the platform. His heart started beating faster. Where in the world was she? He walked quickly to the end of the car and looked back. Maybe she came from the other side. He ran around the car and came back. No one. Amara Lumumba leaned out of the compartment, her face anxious. "Kofi, did you find her?" "No, I'm calling, but she's not picking up." "What do you mean not picking up? The train is already—" Before she could finish, the train shuddered. A light bump, then another. The wheels slowly began to turn. Kofi froze on the platform, watching the car begin to move away. "Kofi, get on immediately!" Amara Lumumba shrieked from the window. The attendant in the vestibule waved her arm, motioning for him to jump. Kofi dashed toward the car, grabbed the handrail, and leaped onto the step, barely making it. The train gathered speed, and the platform blurred past. Kofi stood in the vestibule, breathing heavily, clutching his phone. He dialed his wife's number again. The 6th time. Long rings. He pressed the phone to his ear, as if that would help him connect, and then he heard the familiar female voice that chilled him to the core. "The subscriber you are trying to reach is temporarily unavailable." Kofi's face turned as gray as concrete. His fingers, holding the phone, trembled. He slowly lowered his arm and looked at the screen. 6 outgoing calls. All unanswered. Subscriber unavailable. Not just ignoring the call. Unavailable. Turned off. Kofi stood in the vestibule, feeling panic rise within him. The platform outside the window was gone. Buildings flashed by, then the suburban houses began. The train reached full speed and Zora was left behind somewhere at the station alone with a disconnected phone. He walked into the compartment, his legs weak. Amara Lumumba was sitting on her berth, her face twisted with outrage and fear. "Well, where is she? Did you reach her?" Kofi slowly lowered himself onto the opposite berth and looked at his mother. His tongue wouldn't work. His mouth was dry. "Mom," he croaked hoarsely, "I think we have a serious—" He didn't get to finish. Amara Lumumba leaped up so suddenly she almost hit her head on the upper berth. Her eyes were wide. Her hands gripped the edge of the seat. "How is she unavailable?" Her voice was piercing and hysterical. "Where is she? What do you mean, unavailable?" "Mom, I don't know." Kofi ran a hand across his face. She said she was going to the kiosk for wipes. Amara Lumumba threw her hands up. You idiot! She just left. She intentionally missed the train. Why intentionally? Kofi jumped up and nervously paced the compartment. Why would you say that? Because, Kofi, she turned off her phone. Amara Lumumba raised her voice so loud that a curious middle-aged man poked his head out of the next compartment. People don't turn off their phones just like that. She didn't want to come. She planned this. Kofi froze, staring at his mother. Pieces were starting to click together in his head. Zora had been strangely calm the last few days. She didn't argue, didn't fight, just nodded and did everything they asked. She packed the bags, bought the tickets, hauled that cursed duffel bag to the car, and then just walked away. No way, he muttered. She wouldn't do that. She's not like that. Well, she did, Amara Lumumba interrupted. Her voice was trembling with rage. Look at the situation. We're on a train, heading to the Outer Banks for 3 weeks, and she's back at the station with her phone off. And you know what that means? Kofi remained silent, feeling everything inside him knotting up. It means, his mother-in-law continued, sitting back down on the berth, that someone is going to have to cook, someone is going to have to do laundry, and someone is going to have to pay for everything at the resort. She almost shrieked the last words, and Kofi suddenly understood. He understood completely. Frantically, he pulled out his phone, opened his banking app, and entered his password with trembling fingers. The app loaded. He looked at his balance, $0, 0 cents. What the? Kofi stared at the screen, unable to believe his eyes. How? Where? He scrolled through the transaction history. Last night, while he was asleep, a transfer of $2,500 to the account of Zora Imani Kemet, his wife. Mom! Kofi choked out, looking up at his mother-in-law. My account is empty. She took the money. Amara Lumumba went pale, snatched her phone from her purse, and frantically tapped the screen. She opened her app and looked at her balance. Her hands trembled. The phone nearly slipped from her grasp. Mine is empty too, she gasped. She took everything, every last cent. Silence descended upon the compartment. Only the steady, relentless clack of the wheels. The train was racing further and further away from the city, toward the resort, toward 3 weeks with no money, no communication with the person who was supposed to pay for everything. Kofi slowly sank onto the berth, dropping his phone next to him, and looked at the enormous duffel bag resting against the wall. Slowly, it dawned on him. Zora had packed it, stuffed it with pots, pans, 3 boxes of detergent, linens, and towels, everything they would need for cooking and washing, and sent it off on the train without herself. She did this on purpose, he said quietly, staring into space. She planned the whole thing. Amara Lumumba sat, clutching the edge of the seat. Her face was red, then pale. That snake, she finally hissed. That ungrateful tramp. We took her into our family. We treated her like our own, and she stole the money and left us. How? How dare she? Mom, quiet down. Kofi glanced at the compartment door. People can hear you. I don't care. Amara Lumumba jumped up and began to pace the compartment. I don't care what they hear. Do you realize what she's done? We're stranded in the middle of nowhere for 3 weeks with no money. How are we going to eat? How will we pay for the room? Kofi was silent, staring at the floor. Thoughts tumbled through his head, each one worse than the last. The accommodation was paid for, yes, but everything else, food, activities, any local expenses, had to be paid for separately. And they had nothing. 0. Not a single cent. Maybe we can ask someone to wire us some money? He suggested uncertainly. Who? Amara Lumumba shrieked. Who are we going to ask? Your buddies who are always broke? My friends who I refused to loan money to 6 months ago? Kofi clenched his fists, staring out the window. Forests, fields, and small towns flashed past. Beautiful, peaceful. But inside, everything was churning, boiling, threatening to explode. Anger, fear, the sheer incomprehension of how Zora could do this. Quiet, compliant Zora, who always agreed, always did as she was told, and never talked back. "I'll call her from my number," he said decisively, pulling out his phone. "Maybe she's not taking calls on yours." "She won't take mine either." Amara Lumumba cut him off gloomily, but handed him her phone anyway. Kofi dialed Zora's number from his mother's phone. Rings, long, endless rings. Then the familiar message. "The subscriber you are trying to reach is temporarily unavailable." He tried again and again, 5 times in a row. The same result. Unavailable, switched off, or completely disconnected. "It's no use." He threw the phone onto the berth. "She's not answering." Amara Lumumba sank into her seat and covered her face with her hands. She sat that way for a minute or two, then raised her head, and her eyes held a terrible look. "When we get back," she said slowly, "I will make her regret this. I will sue her for theft, for fraud, for—" "Mom, it's not theft," Kofi interrupted wearily. "She had access to the accounts. Technically, she could transfer the money. Then I'll kick her out of the apartment. She's not even properly on the lease," Kofi interrupted again. "We did the paperwork after the wedding." Amara Lumumba fell silent, staring at her son. Silence descended again upon the compartment, heavy and oppressive. Outside the window, miles streamed by, carrying them further from the city, from Zora, from any chance to change anything. "What are we going to do?" Amara Lumumba asked quietly. "We have to pay for food at the resort. I thought Zora would cook, but now—" "We'll have to eat at the dining hall," Kofi said grimly, "and we don't have any money." "Maybe they'll give us credit for 3 weeks?" "I doubt it." Amara Lumumba covered her face with her hands again. Her shoulders shook. Kofi didn't realize at first if she was crying or just sitting. Then he heard a sob. "Mom, don't," he said awkwardly. "We'll figure something out." "Figure what out?" Amara Lumumba lifted her tear-stained face. "We have nothing. Nothing. Your wife robbed us and abandoned us. We're stranded for 3 weeks with no money, no food. What are we going to eat, Kofi? What?" Kofi couldn't find an answer. He looked at the duffel bag by the wall, huge and stuffed to capacity. Pots, pans, 3 boxes of detergent. All that gear now seemed like a cruel joke. They had nothing to cook and nothing to wash. The duffel bag had become a useless burden they'd have to lug around for 3 weeks. Laughter drifted in from the next compartment. Someone was telling a joke. A happy, cheerful group on vacation. Kofi listened to the voices and felt everything inside him tighten with anger and resentment. Why them? Why did they have to go through this? Why couldn't Zora have just come with them, like a normal wife? Amara Lumumba stood up, walked to the window, and stood there, looking at the passing landscape, hugging herself. "She's changed," she said quietly. "She used to be obedient, compliant, and now she's betrayed us like this." Kofi wanted to disagree, but the words caught in his throat because deep down, he knew. He knew that for the past few months, Zora had been different, silent, distant, agreeing to everything, but without emotion, mechanically. He'd attributed it to stress, to work. But she, it turned out, had been planning, preparing, and waiting for her moment. "Maybe she just missed the train," Amara Lumumba said suddenly, turning around. "Maybe we're panicking for nothing. She'll just get the next one and follow us." Kofi looked at his mother. He wanted to cling to that hope, but he couldn't. Too many coincidences. A disconnected phone, empty accounts, her strange calmness the last few days. Forgot wipes at the kiosk 5 minutes before departure. No, she hadn't missed it. She just hadn't boarded. "Mom, she's not coming," he said quietly. "She never intended to go." "Then why did she pack all this?" Amara Lumumba jabbed a hand toward the duffel bag. "Why the pots, the dishes, the detergent?" "So we would think she was coming." Kofi ran a hand through his hair. "So we would load everything onto the train and leave, and she would stay behind." Amara Lumumba slowly sat down on the berth, staring ahead with an empty gaze. 3 weeks, she whispered. We'll be there for 3 weeks with no money, no food. How will we survive? I don't know, Kofi answered honestly. The train raced on toward Raleigh, toward the resort, toward 3 weeks of uncertainty. Silence hung in the compartment, heavy and hopeless. Kofi sat, staring at the floor. Amara Lumumba stared out the window. Both were silent because there was nothing left to say. The attendant walked down the corridor, offering tea. Amara Lumumba started to ask for some, but remembered they had no money. She waved her hand, and the attendant moved on. Maybe we should get off at the next stop? Amara Lumumba suggested suddenly. Go back to the city? With what money? Kofi looked at his mother. We don't have return tickets, and we can't buy any. Then we'll call someone. Ask them to wire us money. Who, Mom? Who are we going to call? Amara Lumumba opened her mouth to answer, but couldn't find the words, because there was no one. Friends had scattered after endless requests for loans. Relatives had distanced themselves, tired of the constant complaints. All that was left was the two of them. And Zora, who had always been there, always helped, always carried the weight, and now she was gone. We'll ride to the resort, Amara Lumumba said with strained resolve. We'll figure it out when we get there. Maybe they'll be understanding. Give us a grace period or a payment plan. Maybe, Kofi replied without enthusiasm. But both understood it was a flimsy hope. A resort was a business. They needed money, not promises. Without payment, they simply wouldn't be fed or would be kicked out after a couple of days. Kofi picked up his phone again. He dialed Zora's number again. Still the same. Unavailable. He put the phone down, leaned back in his seat, and closed his eyes. He wanted to believe it was a dream, that he would wake up and Zora would be beside him, calm, quiet, ready to help. But this was not a dream. This was reality. Harsh and unforgiving reality, in which his wife turned out to be much smarter and more decisive than he had ever imagined. She had outplayed both of them simply, without a word, without a fight. She packed the bags, paid for the tickets, hauled the duffel bag to the train, and then turned around and walked away. And now they were riding to the Outer Banks for 3 weeks, with no money, no food, and no idea how they would survive, with a duffel bag full of pots and detergent that mocked them by its very existence. Amara Lumumba suddenly stood up, walked over to the duffel bag, unzipped it, and looked inside. She pulled out one of the boxes of detergent, stared at it, and then threw it back in. 3 boxes of detergent, she muttered. 3 boxes, Kofi, so we can wash our own clothes by hand in cold water, because who else is going to do the laundry? I don't know, Mom. I don't know how to wash by hand. Amara Lumumba's voice broke into a hysterical wail. I don't know how. I've used a machine all my life, and she knew. She put the detergent in on purpose to make us suffer. Kofi was silent, because he understood. Zora had indeed known. She knew they couldn't cook, couldn't wash, and couldn't take care of themselves, because she had always been there, always doing everything for them. And now she wasn't. They were left alone, with pots they didn't know how to use, with detergent for hand washing, with 3 weeks ahead of them in which they would have to learn all of it or suffer. Amara Lumumba returned to her seat and covered her face with her hands. Kofi sat across from her, staring out the window. The train raced on, counting the miles, carrying them further away from the city, from home, from their habitual lives. And somewhere back in the city, Zora remained with a disconnected phone, with her $2,500, with plans they couldn't even guess at, calm, free, victorious. Zora sat at the window table, slowly stirring her cooling cappuccino. The waitress brought the menu, but Zora declined. She wasn't hungry. She just wanted to sit here, in the silence, in the cool air conditioning, far from the station, from the train, from the life that had left without her for the Outer Banks. She looked at the phone lying on the table, turned off and silent. She wondered how many times Kofi had already tried to call. 10? 20? And Amara Lumumba? Her hysteria probably started about 5 minutes after the train left, when it finally sank in that her daughter-in-law hadn't just missed the train. Zora pictured the scene, the compartment, Kofi with a trembling phone in his hands, her mother-in-law's face going white, the check of the bank apps, the realization, the panic, and that duffel bag in the middle of the compartment, stuffed with pots and detergent, a silent, pointed reproach. She smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile, for the first time in many months. The waitress walked by, clearing dishes from the next table. Zora raised her hand and asked for the check. She paid, left a tip, stood up, grabbed her small bag, the only luggage she had taken on vacation, and walked out of the cafe. It was hot outside. The sun was beating down. Zora took out her sunglasses, put them on, and looked around. The station was behind her. The train had long since left. Ahead lay the city, the day, 3 weeks of vacation. Her vacation, a real one, without cooking for 3 and washing someone else's socks. She walked unhurriedly down the street, looking at the storefronts. She stopped at an electronics store and walked inside. A consultant approached, smiling. "Good afternoon. Can I help you with anything?" "I'd like to look at laptops," Zora said. "Something reliable for work with good performance." The consultant nodded, led her to the display racks, and began showing her models and detailing their specs. Zora listened carefully, asked questions, chose one option, then a second for comparison, sat at each one, checked the keyboard, the screen, the speed. "I'll take this one," she decided after about 20 minutes, pointing to a silver laptop in the mid-range price bracket. "Excellent choice," the consultant beamed. "Shall we process the purchase?" "Yes." Zora went to the register, took out her card, and paid $1,800. The consultant packed the purchase in a branded bag and handed her the receipt and warranty. She thanked him, walked out of the store with her new laptop in hand, and felt a lightness, as if an enormous burden had been lifted from her shoulders. She had saved up for this purchase for a year, denying herself everything. And then Amara Lumumba had decided, with a single phone call, that this money was simply needed for her because the daughter-in-law was obligated. Obligated. An interesting word. For all her adult life, Zora had been obligated to someone. To her parents for raising her, to the college for her degree, to Kofi for marrying her, to Amara Lumumba for accepting her into the family. Everyone around her demanded, expected, and depended on her. She gave, she did, she fulfilled. But now, enough was enough. Zora hailed a cab, gave her home address, and rode along, looking out the window. The city was noisy, alive, and ordinary. People were rushing about their business, unaware that somewhere on a train heading toward Raleigh, 2 passengers were sitting in a compartment, trying to figure out how to survive 3 weeks with no money, and without the person they had considered a free attachment to the family. Back home, Zora took off her shoes, went to the kitchen, put the kettle on, and brewed herself some good, expensive tea, the kind she had been saving for a special occasion. Today was certainly that occasion. She settled on the couch with her mug and turned on the laptop. Brand new, fast, and responsive. She set up the system, installed the necessary programs, working unhurriedly and with pleasure. No one called her for dinner. No one asked her to wash a shirt for the next day. No one called her with complaints or demands. Silence, peace, freedom. That evening, Zora made herself a simple dinner, an omelet with vegetables, toast, and salad. She sat at the table alone, eating slowly, savoring every bite. There was no need to set the table for 3, cater to their tastes, or listen to her mother-in-law's comments about undersalted soup or overcooked meat. After dinner, she washed her dishes, dried her hands, walked to the bedroom, lay on the bed, and looked at the ceiling. She wondered how Kofi and his mother were doing. Had they reached the resort already, or were they still on the train, arguing about how ungrateful she was? Amara Lumumba had probably called everyone in the car, complaining about her terrible daughter-in-law, while Kofi sat in grim silence, not knowing what to do. He was used to his wife solving everything, organizing everything, paying for everything. Now, he'd have to figure it out himself. Zora turned onto her side and closed her eyes. She fell asleep easily, without anxious dreams, for the first time in many months. The next morning, she woke up late, around 10. She lay in bed, just looking out the window. The sun was shining brightly, and birds were chirping outside. An ordinary summer day. Her day. No schedule, no obligations, no demands from others. She got up, took a shower, ate breakfast, and then turned on her phone. It immediately came to life, vibrating as messages poured in one after another. 50, 70, 127. Zora opened the list. Kofi, Amara Lumumba, Kofi again, her mother-in-law again. Calls, texts, voicemails. She scrolled through, reading selectively. The first ones were indignant. "Where are you? Why aren't you answering? Call immediately." Then they turned accusatory. "You abandoned us. You stole the money. I'm going to sue you." Towards the end, they became pitiful. "Zora, please answer. We're family. Wire us just a little money." The last message from Kofi was sent late last night. "Zora, we're at the resort. They won't feed us without payment. Mom's blood pressure is up. Please, just wire $500. I swear I'll pay you back." Zora finished reading, closed the messenger, selected all the messages, and pressed delete. A confirmation window popped up. She clicked yes. The messages disappeared. Then she opened her contacts, found Amara Lumumba's number, and pressed block contact. Done. Her mother-in-law could no longer call, text, or harass her with demands. Dealing with Kofi was more complicated. He was still her husband, officially, but she didn't block him yet. She simply put the phone down and didn't check the messages again. The day passed peacefully. Zora cleaned out her closet, threw away old clothes she'd been meaning to get rid of, and did her own laundry, not someone else's. She made lunch for exactly one person and sat by the window with a book she hadn't been able to finish for 6 months. She read slowly, thoughtfully. No one interrupted her. No one called her name. No one asked her for anything. Bliss. In the evening, she went online and started looking for professional development courses. She had long wanted to brush up on her Spanish and take a class on new teaching methodologies. She had always put it off because she didn't have the time. Now she did. 3 weeks of vacation that she could spend on herself, on her own development. She found a suitable course, signed up, and paid for it. Another $50 gone. But it was her money, spent on her growth, and it felt right. On the second day, Zora went to the park, walked the paths for a long time, fed the ducks in the pond, and sat on a bench with an ice cream cone, simple pleasures she never had time for before. She ran into a former colleague and they chatted. The colleague complained about her heavy workload, the endless reports, and the students who didn't want to learn. Zora listened and nodded, surprised that she used to be annoyed by all of it. But now it seemed like a minor inconvenience, because the real heavy burden had been something else entirely. The burden was living in constant tension, waiting for the next demand from her husband or mother-in-law. Her colleague asked about her vacation. Zora smiled and said she was spending it at home in a peaceful environment. She didn't mention the Outer Banks, the train, or the duffel bag full of pots. Why bother? It was her story, her private victory. On the third day, Zora turned on her phone again and checked her messages. There were 27 more. Kofi had been texting every few hours, first demanding, then pleading, then almost desperate. "Zora, please answer. Things are really bad for us. They won't even give us hot water at the resort without payment. Mom can't handle this. Wire us at least $1,000. I swear I'll pay it back. Zora, don't ignore me. I know you're upset. Maybe we were wrong, but that's no reason to abandon us in this situation. We're family, Zora, seriously. We're in trouble. We haven't eaten anything but bread and water for 2 days. They won't let us use the dining hall without payment. Please, help us." The last message was sent an hour ago. I get it, you're not going to answer. Fine, we'll manage somehow, but when we get back, we're going to have a serious talk. You can't do this to family. Zora finished reading and pondered. Talk. She wondered about what? About how they had used her as a free servant for 5 years? About how her mother-in-law gave orders and her husband nodded indifferently? About how they took her last savings for their vacation without even asking if she wanted to go? She opened the keyboard and started typing a reply, then stopped, reread it, and deleted it. She wrote it again and deleted it again. After several attempts, she realized there was nothing to say. Everything had already been said, by the train that left without her, by the duffel bag stuffed with pots, by the disconnected phone, and by the empty bank accounts. She closed the messenger without replying and put the phone down. That evening, Zora settled on the couch with her new laptop and opened a movie she'd wanted to watch for a long time. Next to her was a cup of hot chocolate. On the side table lay a bar of her favorite Belgian chocolate, an expensive kind she had never bought for herself, saving every penny. She watched the movie, sipped the chocolate, ate the candy, and enjoyed the moment, her moment, without a trace of guilt, without the thought that she needed to cook, wash, or buy something for someone else. The movie ended late, well after midnight. Zora closed the laptop and stretched. She walked to the kitchen, washed her mug, and looked at the clock. It was late in the Outer Banks, too. Kofi and his mother were probably asleep, or awake, discussing how to live the rest of the trip. 2.5 weeks were still ahead of them, with no money, no food, and a duffel bag in which a pot and detergent mocked them by their very existence. Zora smiled, turned off the kitchen light, walked into the bedroom, and lay down in the wide, comfortable bed, all hers. Kofi had always taken up 3/4 of it, sprawled out, snoring. Now she could sleep any way she wanted. She closed her eyes and drifted off to sleep. Her last thought was, 3 weeks. 3 more weeks of silence, peace, and freedom. And after that, we'll see. When Zora woke up on the 4th day, it was raining outside. She lay there listening to the drops tap against the window pane. Then she got up, brewed coffee, sat by the window, watched the city blurred by the rain, and thought, Kofi will be back in 2.5 weeks, Amara Lumumba too. They would return angry, hurt, and full of complaints. They would demand explanations, apologies, and compensation. Her husband would likely try to appeal to her pity. Her mother-in-law would appeal to her guilt. But there was no more pity, and no more guilt. For 5 years, Zora had given, invested, and carried the burden. For 5 years, they had used her, unnoticed and unappreciated, taking her for granted. And when she simply took what was hers back and walked away, she became a traitor. Interesting logic. Zora finished her coffee, put the cup in the sink, opened the cabinet, took out a box of documents, and found her marriage certificate. She looked at it. Nice paper, seals, signatures, official confirmation that she and Kofi were a family. But family wasn't just a piece of paper. Family was mutual support, respect, and care. And they had no mutuality. It was a contract where she gave everything, and they took it and considered it normal. Zora put the certificate back, closed the box. The decision would come by itself. When they returned, she would know what to do next. For now, she had 3 weeks for herself, for her own life, to remember who she was before she became someone's wife and daughter-in-law. She picked up her phone, opened the calendar, and marked Kofi's return date. 18 days remained until then. Zora looked at the number and nodded to herself. 18 days. Enough time to make a decision. A final, irreversible, correct decision. Outside the window, the rain intensified, turning into a downpour. Zora watched the water stream down the glass, washing away the dust, cleansing everything around. Somewhere in the Outer Banks, it was probably raining too. Kofi and his mother were sitting in the cabin, hungry, angry, and confused, trying to figure out how to survive without money and without the one they considered weak and submissive. And she was here, in her warm apartment, with a cup of coffee, a new laptop, and 3 weeks of freedom ahead. She smiled at her reflection in the dark phone screen, and for the first time in 5 years, felt truly alive. Did you like the story, and which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.